Hello, everyone. We are happy to welcome you to the third web event of Chapter Zero, Ukrainian Caucasus. I am Igor Grigorenko. I am a member of the advisory board of the Chapter Zero Ukrainian Caucasus, and I'm partner at Deloitte Ukraine. I'm, on other things, in charge of our ESG practice, and actively working on projects in this area, and that's probably why I was invited as an intellectual partner to the Chapter Zero initiative to be the moderator today. We're extremely happy to welcome so many guests today. We have over 120 registrations, if I'm not mistaken, and I am especially happy that we are welcoming many people from Ukraine today, despite tonight's air raid. I think we have quite a few people joining us today, still showing interest and hopefully actively participating. Chapter Zero, as probably all of you know, is a part of Global Climate Governance Initiative project, which is conducted under the auspices of World Economic Forum, and basically this is a part of a global network, as you know, and therefore we are trying to involve in our events experts who have, not only the regional view, but also have the view of the broader global perspective. But having said that, today I hope we will have quite a significant regional angle, and more specifically Ukrainian angle, because today we're going to speak about agricultural impact investing in agriculture for social and environmental impact, to be more specific. And we are going to talk with my fellow panelists, with guests. We are going to talk about is there a room to build a specifically Ukrainian story in this area? This is, a hot topic globally. This is attracting a lot of attention. But Ukraine, we have to recognize objectively, is in quite a different starting point from most geographies where this is relevant today. Is it important for Ukraine today? Will it be even more important tomorrow? This is, broadly speaking, the overarching theme of today's discussion. So we hope it will be both insightful and interesting, from the perspective of learning a little bit about the global experience, but we even more hope that this will be also quite practical and especially useful for our guests from Ukraine today. Before actually moving to the discussion itself, I would like to introduce our eminent guest today. I already presented myself. Also today on this call with me is Gilles Metetal. Gilles, if I can ask you to turn on your camera so that everyone can see you this morning. Hello, Gilles. Gilles is a board member in two prominent Ukrainian agricultural companies, Astarta and Nibelon. No, that was not Gilles, actually. Can we show Gilles now? Yes. That person will also be broadcast, but a little bit later. Let's start with Gilles. Gilles is a board member at Astarta and Nibelon, two of the prominent Ukrainian agricultural companies. Gilles is also chairman of the investment committee at a renowned private equity management company, Diligent Capital Partners. And for many years, as I guess many of you know, Gilles has been a director for agribusiness at the BRD. So he actually has as much of global perspective as it gets, I think, in this sector. And this is a great opportunity, I think, today to compare what's happening in Ukraine, what we are observing today in Ukraine in this area, with this global experience. Our second guest is Alex Lisitsa. Okay, so we now finally see Gilles. Gilles, hello, yes. And Alex Lisitsa, the next guest I'm going to present. Can we switch the camera to Alex, please? Alex is also a long-term acquaintance of mine. Alex is the CEO of IMC, another Ukrainian top 10 agricultural company. And Alex has actually been not simply, a CEO of a large agricultural business, but as long as I know him, he has always been a proponent of transforming Ukrainian agriculture into a technology-intense and cutting-edge sector. And, I remember the times when this was not a traditional paradigm. I think now many people actually start viewing it this way. But probably 10 years ago when I first met him, this was, not a typical angle to take. And he was already taking it back then and probably even before then. He is also, I think, probably since the foundation days, the president of the Ukrainian Agribusiness Club, and he is the board member of the Kyiv School of Economics, and that's actually where we first first met with him. And Kyiv School of Economics, may I remind you, is actually the host of Chapter 0 Ukrainian Caucasus. That's why it is relevant today. And finally, our third guest, our third panelist for today, is Alexander Nikolaenko. Alexander, yes. As I said, we will also move the camera to you also, right? So Alexander is a principal at the BRD for climate strategy and regional delivery, and he is the expert not only in climate matters, but also in sustainable energy, and he has been also exposed to this sector in many, many geographies. So I think, you know, all of our three guests bring a lot of relevant, in-depth Ukrainian practical experience. But simultaneously, they all can draw parallels to other geographies globally and to what's happening in terms of relevant trends elsewhere outside of Ukraine. And I hope this will make our discussion even more interesting and productive. So we plan to spend together probably hour and a half, up to 2 hours maximum, and I will not postpone the open discussion too much, but before jumping actually into our panel discussion, I wanted to take a little bit of your time to set the tone for the discussion, to throw in a couple of ideas, to share some slides with you. And actually, that's what I will start with. Just 1 second, I will start broadcasting the presentation. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the presentation right now. Well, investing into agriculture for impact. Why is it important, and why this is not something which is just a sniff of a fashion, not something which is relevant only today. A brief historical digression. So agriculture, which has been around as long as civilization has been around, essentially, right? This is something which started 10,000 years ago and actually made our civilization essentially possible. Agriculture, basically from the start, has been something responsible for a disproportionate share of our impact on the environment. Long before the modern technologies, long before the discussions of the 20th century, this has been something which has been changing the face of the earth. Let's recognize it. The initial, approach to agriculture, the extensive agriculture, which was launched 10,000 years ago in Anatolia and Middle East, this was something which basically led to deforestation and climate change. Even back then, when human population on Earth was hundreds of times less, within hundreds of years, right? So this was casting a disproportionate impact on environment even back then, and this was also having a hugely disproportionate social impact, right? I'm sure many of you know, especially those who are, history buffs, that this was something which basically led to a shortening of expected life duration by at least 5-7 years. This was something which basically changed the fabric of the society in all the geographies where agriculture was launched, and this has been affecting the way we live and interact with the environment for many, many years. Now, starting about the end of 19th century, early 20th century, this has started to generate even much more impact, right? And this is probably when, for the first time, the business leaders and the political leaders started recognizing that agriculture may actually have, a broader impact on the global geopolitical agenda as well. So why? Because the industrialization finally reached agriculture, right? Global industrialization, which started 100 years before that in the United Kingdom and United States, this finally reached agriculture. Mechanization technologies, introduction of tractors, new types of machines, this has actually multiplied the ways in which agriculture affects our environment and our society. On the one hand, we are talking about significant usage of fossil fuels. We are talking about magnificent achievements in terms of productivity and increases in terms of scale. But on the other hand, we're also talking about the disruptions in the traditional structure of the society. We are talking about displacement of traditional labor-intense agriculture with mechanized technology. And we are talking about huge social shifts and adaptations, right? So this was basically generating even more impact, which was globally recognized. But the more serious, recognition probably came in the second half of the 20th century with the arrival of, modern organized R&D biochemistry and chemistry technologies, and with the so-called green revolution, right? This is where basically, for the first time, we realized that probably less than 5% of labor force can feed, the entire global population if properly organized on the one hand. But on the other hand, we also realized that the way our agriculture is developing, we may basically deplete our resources and ruin our environment within decades, not even within hundreds of years, right? Towards the end of the 20th century, this recognition actually led to establishment of first, private and social non-profit initiatives, but then it actually led to something we know today as the Paris Agreement, to global coordinated action on the side of the governments, and actually I think it contributed largely to the last wave of agricultural, significant tectonic changes, to the emergence of the information age in farming, right? To the introduction of precision technologies, to the cybernetic technologies being used to actually reduce or at least limit impact on the environment, and to actually start planning the holistic impact of agriculture, not only in terms of narrow food security perspective, but also globally, right? So, having said all of that, we're still in the point where this problem of agriculture being one of the major, if not the major contributors to our impact on the environment, and especially negative impact on the environment, this problem is not solved by far, right? So agriculture is still accountable at least, for 12% of global greenhouse emissions. It is directly reducing the pool of natural resources available to us, and especially when we are talking about depleting water resources, salinization of soils, and things like that. But equally importantly, we should be mindful not only of direct impact of agriculture, we should be mindful also of the way we conduct it traditionally and of the huge waste generated by agricultural sectors, right? So this is not only agriculture per se, which is generating this huge impact. This is also the habits we adopted over the last 10,000 years, and let's be honest, inefficiencies we have been neglected enough to generate systemically, right? This is something we have to deal with. So why is this, introduction? Why is this, brief kind of reminder and historical digression? I hope by now everyone on this webinar at least would agree that solving the global social and environmental problems without addressing the agricultural issues is simply impossible. This is probably, one of the top 3 areas, if not the top area, where the root of the problem lies, right? And if you really want to solve a whole area of global environmental and social problems, this is where you have to start and act immediately, agriculture, right? And this is, what has led to the emergence of this ESG framework and adoption in agriculture of the ESG framework to leading business operations in agriculture, probably ahead of the most industries. Agriculture has been one of the 2 or 3 industries where ESG approaches to conducting business and reporting about it, disclosing it, have been adopted ahead of the curve. Having said that, we understand that this has been adopted historically unequally. So Europe and some of the other developed economies are actually quite keen to progress here. Some of the other economies are behind. Ukraine was actually progressing, quite significantly in the last several years, catching up with Europe, not caught up certainly, but catching up with Europe in my opinion. Addressing not only social but also environmental issues, preparing to synchronize the regulatory framework, but also the business practices. But then, we all know that in February last year, the full-scale invasion started, full-scale Russian invasion, and this has significantly impacted, the trajectory in this area as well. How exactly? I will not steal the light from our eminent panelists. I hope this is something we will learn in talking to them. But we have to recognize that, with all the trends in Ukraine in this area before February 2022, we have to revisit them, and we have to consciously reprioritize what is even more relevant today, what probably has to be postponed, and what has to be pursued, but with a different objective in mind, right? And this will be hopefully part of our discussion today. Now, the pressure to adopt this new approach to agriculture, and not only agriculture, but leading business in general, but we are talking about agriculture today, is coming from different angles, right? And one angle which is worth mentioning is, first, I guess, is actually pressure from potential investors. Why? Because we all hope that when our victory finally arrives at the military front, for the economy in general, the battle uphill will only start, right? The Ukraine reconstruction program and Ukraine development program, this will be a huge challenge. Simply because of the, not simply because of the amounts involved, but because of the technological complexity of the projects potentially, because of the scale in terms of geography, in terms of labor needed, and so on and so on. And we will need support of investors, both financial and in terms of sharing their knowledge and best practices. And those investors today globally, they are already very sensitive to the ESG topic and to incorporating social and environmental impact into the investment thesis from the start, right? We already, know that even today, ESG aligned themes, they seem to be having a disproportionately higher growth rates among the private equity firms and institutional investors. Special climate and social focused funds have been set up over the last 3-5 years at least. And if I'm not mistaken, at least 40% of leading private equity investors today, they already have incorporated, numerically and technically in a strict way, the ESG factors into their screening and investment criteria, right? So this is something they not only look at, but they look at rigorously. This is like the must-have factor for the investors globally today. And even if, whatever reconstruction program we are launching in Ukraine after the victory, even if it is supported, by G7 governments, even if it is operating under the auspices of the international donor organizations, but still it does not have a prominent ESG element, especially in agriculture, which traditionally has been so important for Ukraine. I'm not sure this whole thing will fly because, let's be honest, the investment and knowledge needed for the success of reconstruction program will not come solely from governments and from international donor organizations. Those can be organizers and providers of seed money, but global experience shows that any successful program of this similar scale, because this scale I think it has not been achieved in the last 70-80 years at least. Any program of similar scale, it has to rely on private money for more than 60-70% of the total funding, right? And we need to take this ESG element into account. Now, element number 2 is, of course, regulation, right? So apart from the pressure from private investors and institutional investors globally, we are, on a road to Euro integration. Government currently, maybe, a bit too optimistically, but is declaring that we should be the members of the European Union 3 years from now. Even if it is not 3 years from now, the synchronization and harmonization of our regulation will proceed, I expect, with a significant pace, with an accelerated pace compared to whatever was happening over the last years. And we have to be synchronized with European Union, both in terms of compliance practices we introduce, but also in terms of targets, right? And we all understand that the basic targets for the European Union, for example, are set by the Green Deal, starting from net zero by 2050 and down to all the specific targets at the individual country levels, which are contributing towards this overall nationally determined contribution. So Ukraine, in this respect, is facing a tremendous challenge in terms of synchronizing the targets and regulation. But I think Ukraine is also facing a tremendous opportunity with all the traditional strengths in agriculture. And with all the natural, advantages of our country, I think we can actually use this as a potential opportunity. How exactly? Again, another theme for discussion potentially today. Regulation in EU. One note I must add here: regulation in the EU is not also something fixed. This is also something continuously tightening in this respect, and changes have been, introduced even over the last couple of years. So apart from basic parameters of the Green Deal, which are set for the 2021-2027, and some of them are reflected on the slide, we should also recognize, for example, something which is not mentioned on the slide: the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Initiative, which is directive, which has been enacted January this year, and which basically affects not only European companies on a huge scale, because approximately at least 50,000 European companies, so extending down to mid-sized businesses, are directly affected. It also impacts all the companies which operate actively that way or another, and which is sufficiently large, so passing the threshold at least for a mid-cap business, operate in the European Union. And Ukrainian companies, most of our agricultural companies, large agricultural companies, are falling into that category. Not only those which are already issuing, shares or debt instruments in the European market, but also those which are only actively trading in the market there, right? So they are also in scope and covered by those regulations. And two messages then to take away from this angle. First, we have to harmonize and catch up, but second, we also have to be mindful that the European Union legislation is also becoming stricter in this area, and we have to not target the harmonization with what we see today. We need to target harmonization with what most likely will be there 3-4 years from now, right? And this is even a higher challenge. And finally, another element of pressure is coming actually from the people, right? From consumers, from civil society, from local communities in which we operate. And frankly speaking, if it could be ignored probably like 10 years ago even in Ukraine, I don't think it can be ignored now. Ukraine in this respect is becoming more and more like a European country. Interesting service we have been conducting as Deloitte in Ukraine among younger labor participants in Ukraine are showing that actually ESG factors and ESG elements of the brand reputation of a potential or current employer are playing an increasingly important role for them. So Ukrainian consumers overall are not that sensitive yet to ESG factors, but they are already sensitive. I think more than 20% of Ukrainian consumers are actually incorporating this into their buying decisions. But Ukrainian employees, and especially younger employees, those below 30, 50%, more than 50% of them say that this is a very important factor for them, and reputationally, the company is known to be operating in a way damaging to environment, disregardful of the needs of local communities, or not in partnership with the civil society in general. This most likely will lead to them, quitting the company or choosing another employer, and this is something you have to consider even today. In European Union, where we have been conducting similar service for a much longer time, those numbers are even higher. And one of the questions we have been addressing to the companies specifically, right, which groups exert most pressure on you, and where do you feel this pressure to act actually in the climate change area, for example, is one of the key elements of ESG today. Regulators come across as first, as the most pressing, of course, but consumers are not far behind. Consumers and civil society are having almost, identical numbers, and we have to recognize that. Even if regulation sort of stabilizes 2-3 years from now, pressure from consumers, from employees, from people will mount further, most likely. And again, this is something which I mentioned not only, as a fun fact. This is something which I want to be another theme in our discussion today, in our panel discussion, something which is probably having a special angle in Ukraine. On the one hand, as I said, we are observing that especially younger people in Ukraine are becoming more like Europeans. On the other hand, the war might have changed a lot in this respect. And what our guests observe today and what they think might be the trend in the coming years, how the priorities are likely to shift, especially in the labor force. This is an important question which I hope we will address today as well. Now, wrapping up a little bit my brief introduction and actually progressing to our discussion. ESG, ESG, as I said already in the beginning, cannot be addressed globally as a framework if you ignore the agricultural sector, right? Agriculture is actually generating significant impact on the environment and probably the most significant or at least comparable with energy. A recent estimate published, for example, by S&P is that the industrialized farming, and this ignores, the smaller scale individual farming in less developed economies, which is also contributing to damages for the environment. Industrialized farming practices, they lead to damages and losses on a scale of around $3 trillion annually. This is a significant, amount. This is actually this is something which can basically negate the whole global annual GDP growth and basically set us off, from the global growth trajectory. The investments to actually mitigate this impact or to put it under control, they have been growing significantly. They have been picking up. They have been picking up over the last decade, steadily. But still, the total pool which is actually devoted to ESG impact investments in agriculture, this is still much smaller, and the most recent estimate is probably like at least 7-8 times smaller than this 3 trillion number. So we have a long road to make ahead of us, and hopefully Ukraine can be a contributor to this global effort in a way which is meaningful to Ukraine. One final remark here. This is I have been focusing to a large extent in my intro speech on the negative impact we have to address, on the peculiar, Ukrainian angle we have to incorporate here, because we have to balance between addressing the negative impact of agriculture and actually generating sufficient food security for our people and globally, and generating economic growth at the end of the day. But this is also an opportunity, right? One of the examples of this opportunity is, for example, the bioenergy, the traditional focus of agriculture on providing reliable food supplies. This is expanding progressively, as most of you surely know. Bioenergy has been becoming for the last several years something quite visible globally, but this is something which will become a critical element of the global power supply over the next 20-25 years. So the current estimates at the moment, which have been published in the Deloitte Future of Energy report 2 years ago, the current estimates are that the biomass will account in roughly 25 years from now, probably for 20-25% of the total primary energy supply, right? This share will be lower at the secondary energy sources level, most likely because of different reasons, because part of that biomass will be actually reprocessed within agriculture itself, because of the slightly lower conversion coefficients compared to some other energy sources. But at the end of the day, we are talking about probably the second most significant source of power supply globally. Biomass, most likely, and biofuels and everything related to that, most likely will be the second most significant power supply globally. What does it mean for agriculture globally? What does it mean for Ukraine specifically? This is another theme which we can throw in today, and this is something which I hope our guests will help me to discuss and understand a little bit better, because this is changing the game for agriculture globally as well. So having said all of that, and having hopefully introduced some of the key themes I hope to discuss with my guests today, let me come back to them. As I said, we will have 3 panelists, but I want to warn you in advance that unfortunately Gilles will have to leave us a little bit ahead of time, right? So we have slightly less time with him, and that's why I probably will start with a direct question to him. That's probably he will be the first one to to answer my question. Gilles, if we can switch camera to Gilles, hopefully, right now while I'm speaking. Gilles, so my question is very simple. I try to outline, very at a very high level, the global picture and and what is happening. But from your perspective, a person who is basically understanding, both the Ukrainian side of the story and the global side, the global trends. How much before the full-scale war, the Ukrainian trends have been reflecting the global trends? How much we have been caught up with the global trends in terms of ESG investing in agriculture, and what was different, right? Can you compare the situation on the brink of the war a year ago in Ukraine and globally? Thank you very much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and thank you for the nice introduction too. The way I would like to put it is the fact is we talk a lot about the ESG. It is an important issue now, but I would like to talk more about the standards, the increasing standards, and one of the reasons why Ukraine has been so successful. Let's remember that it moved from a situation where it was barely self-sufficient in terms of food to one of the biggest exporter of food in the world, and the impact of the invasion has shown how important Ukraine was globally today. So one of the reasons for that success was a dynamic private sector that has increased its standards, not to be good for the environment, but just for a very simple reason: to be more resilient, to be more profitable, and to attract financing from international communities and from multilateral development agencies with which I was working. So, if I take the example of Astarta or of Nibulon, Astarta started to invest in energy efficiency equipment. It had, huge impact in terms of reduction of carbon emission, but it had also a huge impact in terms of improving the profitability of the company. Astarta invested in a biomass conversion with a biogas plant. Again, huge impact in terms of carbon emission, but also huge impact in terms of profitability of the company. So by increasing the standard, the companies could be more efficient. Modernizing agriculture, buying new combine harvesters mean losing much less, harvest and much less food also. So, that has been, a very important, aspect. In the case of Nibulon, using river transportation was a much more efficient and much less polluting way of transport than other ways of transport, like trucks, for example. So that's also been, a very positive impact on the environment. This company have done that. And then they have also put environment, and especially Astarta, have put environment as a core of their objective. Not because, mainly because these companies, and this is why I like working with them, they have the impact on their country as a main objective. Both companies never took a dividend from, or almost never took a dividend from their profit. They reinvested everything in developing their company and developing their country. And I think that's also been a reason why, this has been so successful. We have Alex here, and we all know that Alex also has put the development of his own country as a core objective for him. And that has made the country so successful. And this success story that has happened in Ukraine, since the early century is remarkable, is unique, probably in the world, and has not been seen. And it is why the companies have been able also to react very quickly to the invasion, to return to exporting products, for example, and supplying food to the rest of the world, not in the way it should be, but it's still in a very remarkable way. And most of these companies are now managing to survive, despite not receiving any support from anybody. And I will come back to that.
Okay. Thank you. Please continue.
No, just 2 points more, actually 3 points, and I will finish there. The first one is the impact of the war. I am a bit shocked to see that the private sector receives so little support after the war. Out of 20 billion of support that has been committed to Ukraine, less than 2 billion goes to the private sector and to the private companies. And they are the ones who have to keep surviving an operation and keep the country going. So I think it is very important to ensure that more focus will be done in order to support the companies. They all need, great support, in terms of, debt restructuring, for example, and also demining, support, access to markets. This is very important. Then looking at what is happening in the rest of the world, you mentioned biofuel, very important. There are different types of biofuels. Some of them can only be viable with strong subsidies, and I think that's not a great future. Some of them that use the whole biomass can be very effective financially, even without subsidy, and I think that's the ones we should emphasize. The other point I would like to make, you mentioned about the impact of agriculture on the environment globally. It's, if you add food, it's probably 1/3 of the gas emission coming from agriculture and food. Mm-hmm. One of the important reasons behind that is that 70% of the agricultural land in the world is used not to feed humans but to feed animals. And the way the future of the world will eat and will manage its feed is really going to be very important. One aspect that is very strong emphasis in Asia, for example, is alternative proteins and vegetable proteins. Okay, I think this is something that where Astarta has invested a lot with soya, initially for animal feed, but also potentially for human feed. So I think this is an important area where Ukraine should be looking at and could have a very strong potential, comparative advantage. For that, it needs to invest in more value-added products, in more processing also, and this is clearly something that should be the focus of the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You basically already answered the second question I wanted to throw at you, which was exactly about the impact of war. Yes. May I then ask Alex Lisitsa to comment? And Alex, I mean, the question stands the same, but basically one thing I wanted to add is Gilles was talking about this huge success story of transforming the Ukrainian agriculture over the last 20 years, but and it was a success, right? Probably, we were not yet there where we wanted to be, but it was a huge success. We have to recognize that. But then he mentioned about the impact of the war, and from your very kind of down-to-earth operational perspective, are we now kind of on hold on all the impact investment projects, and we are simply in the mode of surviving, or Ukrainian agriculture actually plans ahead, and some of the projects are still relevant, going on, and we are planning for the future also?
Thank you, Yegor. Thank you to Gilles, and hello, everybody. The Ukrainian agribusiness or Ukrainian agriculture has a completely different picture compared to the European agriculture or even Latin American one, because we have a kind of, if you look on the farm structure here, so we have a kind of bimodal distribution of farms. We have, of course, benchmarks like Astarta, MHP, IMC, etc. They have implemented a lot of stuff, like all the three key pillars of ESG have been implemented, and they do work with international investors and with international banks, and everything works quite well. But we have on the other hand, we have actually a huge number of private households, which were still responsible for 99% of the production of potatoes, or 95% of production of some fruits and vegetables. So that's a huge area, huge land, where we have no idea what's going on. We don't need even to speak about ESG, etc., etc. So that means we have a completely different picture in Ukraine compared to other countries, other geographies, and other sectors as well. So Ukrainian agriculture has a kind of different type of tradition. And if you look on ESG, I think the best improvements of the last 15 years were done in Ukrainian agriculture with G. So corporate governance has been improved, definitely not only in the large companies, but also in the middle-sized companies. And we do observe increased number of the students at the Ukrainian Academy of Corporate Governance. We do see a huge movements actually in changing of the corporate structures with payment, with everything. So, but two other points like environment and the social, I think we have here in the country a huge lack of misunderstanding. That was before the war, that is during the war, and that will be after the war. And I think that will be the key issue for many stakeholders actually after the war, to start to learn to teach the Ukrainian representatives of agriculture what does it mean. Some of the international institutions like IFC or EBRD already started to do that, but only with key clients. And I think that's a big problem, actually. So Ukrainian agriculture has, as I said before, a different history. And one is like a friend of mine, Roman Sheremeta, who is the president of American University in Ukraine. He likes to tell the story, like, the Ukrainian small farmers, the Ukrainian inhabitants of the villages, they use the latest iPhone to illuminate the way to the toilet outside. And that's exactly the point we do. 40% of the toilets in the rural areas are out of the house, and 60% of water supply in the rural area is not centralized. So that is a key issue for the next generations, I think, because if we do speak about ecological stuff, climate change, et cetera, that's everything nice, and the targets are more or less clear for the country. But if we do come down to the earth, it looks completely different. For many people, completely ununderstandable. So my mom, for example, she produces potatoes. She will never accept that potatoes she produces in the garden are not organic. She uses all the fertilizer she can find somewhere in bazaar. She uses all the plant protection. She does not understand what kind of plant protection where it's coming from, because the neighbors do that. But she is pretty sure that's the most organic stuff ever had. And that do think actually a lot of people still, unfortunately. And you can imagine, for example, another one issue, we have like 60% of pork production also by private households. Due to the legislation of the European Union, actually slaughter at home is completely forbidden. So can you imagine to forbidding Ukraine slaughtering of the pork at home? That will be a revolution, because we cannot accept that. And I can actually explain a lot of different types of examples, but I think what we do have, we have a transformation ahead. We have done a good stuff over the last 15 years, but Ukraine, even 2003, 2004, has imported wheat. So right now we are a global player, but we have a huge road ahead to be internationally competitive, also competitive actually with ESG, with all the benchmarks global act. And the only one way is the full integration to the European Union, to take over the European standards, to work with international finance institutions, etc.
Okay, thank you very much. If I may, ask a follow-up question here. So, thank you for this sobering perspective, and this is, as down to earth as it gets. And I couldn't agree more with you that actually we are focusing to a large extent now on large agricultural conglomerates, but in reality, more than half of the problem is actually in this down to earth, smaller scale private sector. But we are not really completely unique in this sense, right? This is a problem which has been solved in other countries, like Southern Italy, frankly speaking. I think it was pretty much the same like 70 years ago. And somehow, they moved to the more European perspective. Some of the Balkan countries are actually in the process right now, right? So question is, this S, social, and E elements, how do you promote this in the broader kind of class of Ukrainian farmers, and how do you educate them? Is this the task for the government? Is this the task, for private associations? Is this something which will happen just because of the, new standards and pressure of the consumers? How do you see this? And whether it will take, I don't know, 20, 30 years like it was in Italy, or this is something we can do in 7?
I mean, we cannot compare our agriculture with Italy or with any other country in the European Union, because in European Union is a clear regulation that everything which is called agriculture producer should have more than 2 hectares of land. So 99% of our producers of potatoes having up to 1 hectare of land. So it's completely different story. We need really, like, I think 30, 40 years to be on the level of South Italy. But it's not about that. I think yesterday before was a very nice article in a German magazine Spiegel, but they have been also discussed about the ESG, especially climate targets for their companies. And they found out that a lot of companies, they do declare the targets, but no one or just few of them have real implementation plan, clear implementation plan with clear steps to achieve that goal. I think that's exactly the point here. So to talk about some kind of climate change, so in agriculture, so in primary agriculture especially, to achieve a reduction of CO2 means we need to change the technology. We need to go to no-till technology. No-till technology means 5 up to 7 years investments and problems with yields. So are we ready right now to talk about that? Probably yes, but not everyone. And then we have also another one problem, and that's actually the no-till technology, a kind of solution for CO2 reduction in the agriculture. But in the same time, we have in Ukraine again the problem with the land market, because land market was only introduced 2 years ago. So we have still fields where there are like 50, 60 landowners with completely different understanding of what should be done there. So I think education, yes. The pressure from society will increase, but we need also to educate society. Because if we do speak about S, for example, I will never forget the story when I've been like 3 or 4 years ago, opening ceremony of the $200 million investment in a South Kiev region, one huge manufacturer. And, everyone coming from the society, speak from government, from the local governments, they have been told not about creation of the jobs there. They say, yeah, thank you very much, the foreign investor, that you have built the road to that. Thank you very much. But we need actually to create here a school. We need to build here a kindergarten, etc., etc. And that's exactly the stupid Ukrainian agriculture history, because the agriculture companies were responsible on the rural area for everything, for schools, for buses, for etc., etc. And the acceptance, or actually the expectation of the society, has been also stable on that issue. So for example, if I go to, it doesn't matter which one region, which one village, and we'll talk to the local communes, they have a number of questions to me, which actually completely different with as you will find in your presentation. They will ask me to build the road, they will ask me to build that and to repair the school, and I don't know what. So that's completely different. So we need to educate the community as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Gilles, I know you have little time left before you have to depart, and I really wanted to ask at least another question to you while we still have you. Given the perspective shared by Alex, and given his I think very correct and precise observations that E and especially S in Ukraine sometimes mean not exactly the same thing, which would be hiding under those letters in Europe. In your opinion, what is the story we should be telling to potential European investors, both at the national level but also at the level of private investors, to make sure that our agenda here is interesting to them, and we actually get the money, but we are able to address the needs of our local communities? Which elements we should stress? You as a person who is on the both sides of the fence, do you see such story plausibly being constructed?
First of all, I'd like to say, the European farming is not, perfect too. By far, there is a lot of problems of compliance with regulations. Compliance with animal welfare is very important, and it's probably not met in most countries. Compliance with environment, there are scandals every time. and it continues. So, you know, I would say that probably Ukraine is actually, you know, has better standards than most European, you know, most of the European agriculture. The other aspect that Ukraine can really sell is the ability to produce in a very efficient and very competitive way. Most of Western European agriculture is actually struggling to keep competition. You know, they are now, I mean, take the example of my country. Today, half of the chicken are imported. While we were, you know, one of the biggest exporters of chicken globally. Why? Because, you know, some companies like MHP not only produce with, you know, good standards, but they are much cheaper than any European producer. So it is, I think, in the interest of European investors to develop synergies between Ukraine and Europe in order to help improving their you know, productivity, their efficiency, but as a result also add more value and produce more higher technology, you know, products that Ukraine might not always be able to do. So that we can really, and we should emphasize much more on the synergies between the two agricultures rather than on the competition between the two.
Thank you. But again, agriculture is probably one area where in Europe, at least from you know, from my perspective, the European regulation is only part of the story, and the national element of the regulation is much stronger than in many other sectors, right? So you can kind of sell this synergy story at the overall European level, but penetrating deeply many of the national markets is simply, you know, beyond our reach because they are so overprotected. Do you see this as a potential problem, or you think, you know, I'm overemphasizing those potential barriers?
Well, you know, the war has turned Ukraine definitively towards the West, and the West is understanding that this is a no return now. So today there is no protection for agricultural product between Ukraine and the rest of Europe, provided Ukraine is able to produce with you know, European standards, which is you know, I think the story of the egg is a very interesting one. You know, you have to raise the hen and the chicken in rich cages, which is more expensive. You know, Ukraine doesn't have to do that, but in order to export eggs towards Europe, they have to invest themselves in either cage-free or enriched cages, right? And that's you know, happening naturally, and this is a good thing. Now, obviously, you still have to compete with other countries in the world that don't have the same regulations and are cheaper, and then you can probably process the egg and then export it to Europe, even if the egg doesn't come from, you know, the European standards production level. So things are complicated. Clearly, I think there is a need at Europe level to have a certain level of protection because other countries don't apply the same standards and especially the same standard in terms of environment, and therefore they become more competitive, but it's unfair competition, and same on social basis, by the way, you know. So there is a need. Ukraine will be part of that, you know, economic group, and this is why I think there is a scope for developing strong synergies between the two, and it is happening already. You know, it is happening. MHP has invested in EU, you know, chicken production, and you know, they will continue to develop their growth, and that's great, you know, because it will give both consumers, you know, access to cheaper food, but also, you know, open new export opportunities for Europe.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me finally move to our third speaker, Alexander Nikolaenko. So we actually have two, you know, very compatible and complementary, but a little bit conflicting points of view here, right? One is that, okay, over the last 15-20 years, there was a huge progress in Ukrainian agriculture. A lot has been achieved, and in some respects, the standards are even higher than in some of the European countries, right? But on the other hand, as Alex was mentioning, this is not really representative of the overall trend, of the entire Ukrainian agricultural sector, because, we, apart from those large flagship companies, we also have a huge small-scale private sector, and this has not really been changing that much, right? From your perspective as a representative of one of the largest institutional global investors, specifically focused on impact and development projects, from your perspective, first, is this a fair description of the situation? And second, if it is, what can be practically done to actually, make the ground a little bit more even, to align those two trajectories, and to have an attractive overall, investment story for Ukrainian agriculture?
Thank you, Igor. First of all, I would like to mention that EBRD, as the impact investor, has a specific mandate to support implementation of ESG goals and development of the agenda. One of our key priorities to be Paris aligned, to be ESG aligned with implementation of our goals, to support green transition, to support equal opportunities and digitalization within our activity. When I'm talking that we are fully Paris aligned, it means that all our operations, not only with large companies, but also operations through our partner banks and partner financial institutions, should be Paris aligned. And we see a huge impact and a huge pressure of not only direct investments, but also our smaller investments to SMEs, to private recipients of financing, to be in line with ESG goals and in line with Paris agenda. As a development institution, we are not only providing financial support, we also have mandate to have policy dialogue activities, and currently we are heavily support government of Ukraine through our reform support teams, aiming to align Ukrainian legislation with European legislation. We are providing technical assistance, which also has important knowledge management component, especially within agricultural advisory. And we are providing incentives. Incentives both for small businesses for implementation of climate-related improvements, and we are providing incentives to large companies. And I believe that in general, we could say that there is significant development in Ukraine, both within small farmers and large corporates, which are looking both on opportunities and challenges which they have right now, prior to the war, right now, and in the future period of time. And they're trying to develop activities. In particular, as a part of our regular due diligence process, we start to assess physical climate risks, risks associated with transition to green economy. And we see that company which is investing in green technologies are more resilient to current situation in Ukraine, to climate change, to energy crisis, because they already invest in, for example, bioenergy technologies or in regenerative agriculture practices like organic agriculture. So they simply do not need fossil fuels and synthetic fertilizers. And it seems for me that clusters which is created in Ukraine, but by prominent farmers and larger corporates, has significant impact not only on these corporates, but also on the smaller farmers who are suppliers of their product to that corporate.
May I actually clarify something here, right? You mentioned that you basically have a sort of, I'm simplifying, but you basically have a sort of grid which incorporates specific criteria, for all three letters, E, S, and G, right? And you screen your investments by applying that grid. But one thing which I wanted to ask, how much you can fine-tune it to a specific situation in Ukraine, for example, because we do understand that E is globally tremendously important right now, but for us maybe S is more important, with people suffering directly from the war impact in occupied and deoccupied territories, with veterans coming back and eager to secure a workplace, to have a decent standard of living for themselves and their families, and so on and so on, right? So how flexible EBRD, and not only EBRD, but also other similar global donor organizations, how flexible they are in a situation like this?
So in general, answer, I could provide you some figures. Yes, it is the easiest way. Prior to the invasion, regular investments in Ukraine from the EBRD side was around 1 billion euro per year, from which nearly 60% of investments was in green economy. So we are financing different energy efficiency improvements, renewable energy, sustainable farming practices, etc. Last year, and I'm proud of it because EBRD is the only international institution which took risk on our account. We provided to Ukraine 1.7 billion euro of investment, from which only 18% was green. Therefore, the rest of funds was actually provided to support and increase resilience of private sector and public sector in Ukraine. Therefore, green is still in agenda. We would like to do more in environmentally related fields. But you're absolutely right. Green is not only one of our focus, and I'm proud that this year we already signed an agreement with one of the agricultural company, which is committed to develop so-called no limits plan to create opportunities for veterans. Which will come from the war to Ukraine, to create opportunities for them for their further development in normal life. Therefore, both social aspects, environmental aspect is important for us, but I also need to mention corporate governance practice. In particular, corporate climate governance practice. So, large corporate, not only should take into account and manage development of the company, but also assess risk and opportunities which exist within environmental agenda. Just to mention, just before the Envision starts, we are completed with one of the Dutch University Wageningen for one of our clients a study of impact of climate change for the crop yields for that particular company. And it shows that in long-term perspective, their yields for winter wheat will increase by 10%, and for corn it will decrease by 15% in long-term projections. So it creates a possibility for the decision for long-term perspective planning and strategy of the development of the companies. And therefore, I believe that corporate climate governance is important step for our corporates. And for example, I could mention a couple of them. MHP, which has zero emission target in nearby future, pledge of kernel to reduce their emissions, and also other companies, including IMC, who is working on development of their targets to be compliant with the best available practice of ESG goals.
Okay, thank you. Last question. I mean, for now, last question before we jump back to Alex. Since you have this, broad view of the entire sector in Ukraine, very honestly, in your opinion, what would be the top 3, top 5, investment themes sellable not only to donor organizations but also to private investors in agriculture in Ukraine over the next 3-5 years, and having a strong ESG impact element?
Of course, it is, as you mentioned, biomass is a hot topic, especially renewable gases, in particular biomethane or bioenergy. For example, one of our company, partner company in Ukraine, 2 years before the war, invest in grain dryers, which operate on biomass, on straw. They working perfectly during war period of time because they are fully independent of the natural gas issue. But bioenergy topic is one of the hottest right now. You even could sell it with some renewable premium to European market. Second topic, I believe it is organic agriculture practices, precise agriculture practices, and yeah, I believe it is the key priority right now for the sectors.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Alex, if I may address the same question to you, if you could comment, do you agree with those themes, or you see that the list must be extended? That's like one question. But the second one is what you, as a CEO of a prominent Ukrainian agricultural company, have been doing in those themes, and are you really kind of seriously considering projects there?
Thank you. Probably a few words about my company. IMC is an agriculture company, operates 120,000 hectares of land in 3 regions, Chernigiv, Sumy, and Poltava. So we have actually a very simple business model, primary production, storaging, and exporting. So was actually a very simple model before the war, but as you can imagine, during a few days after the war started, 70% of our land was occupied in Sumy and Chernigiv, and yeah, and the idea actually was of mine to present on a big event in Chernigiv on 15th of May last year, the new green strategy for IMC 2030. So the green strategy was a very complex one, including the pillars of ESG, etc., moving to the modern agriculture, so kind of smart green strategy 2030 for IMC. But unfortunately, last year in May, I found out that 35,000 hectares, or more than 30% of the land, was mined. So we have, of course, postponed everything what we could postpone. So we have started with issues which, for me, were completely, I have never had in my life such like that. So it was the mining and issues like, completely different stuff. So anyway, we have a strategy. We also do work with some international banks to start to implement that strategy, not for the whole company, but for clusters with special impact on environment, like moving to the no-till strategy or no-till technology, but also reducing of CO2 emissions, etc., etc. That means we've been actually before the war at the company clear that is the way for the future for us. So no other chances to survive if we do not become the green company. But the war has destroyed the strategy. Right now, we decided not to focus on the whole company, but just to concentrate on a part of, and together with with IFIs, we will actually proceed it. So that's about the company. For us, is clear. ESG is a future. In the future, we will be not able to be competitive on the global market, either in a financial or fighting for the financial resources or actually selling the outputs. That will be definitely not. So for us, it's clear we need to move on. But in the same time, as I said before, right now we have completely different challenges, starting with not that topics we have had before. And another one issue, like for me, like for CEO of the company, is sometimes, especially for the farms which are located in the border regions with Belarus and Russia, I do feel myself sometimes more like a psychology doctor than a CEO, because to keep people there working, to motivate them, that's a completely different story. So anyway, we will keep going on the direction green strategy, but a little bit slowly, not that we thought before. They were discussed a lot of issues, and I just wanted to comment a little bit what Gilles said, and I do agree with him completely that we have done and the top companies a lot here. And if you look on the global market, I mean, there are not that many globally working large-scale companies. But anyway, we have a club. So we have like top largest agriculture companies club. The majority of the companies coming from Latin America, but also Australia, Canada, etc., South Africa, and Ukraine, of course. And we are in terms of ESG, we are far away from them. I mean, top companies are definitely better positioning right now, even right now, than all other guys together. And that's achievement what we have done together with banks, with input suppliers, with international community. And I think that's exactly what Gilles said. We have such projects here in Ukraine you will not find anywhere in the world. And that's a big achievement. But in the same time, in the future for us, I'm pretty sure that we need to do everything just to, as soon as possible, to implement all the European legislation to go forward to the European Union. And I do believe that it will be actually not that easy way, but probably will be the soonest way to become really a modern agriculture business, not only for top companies, but for the whole sector.
One thing I have to ask here, right? So far, we have not been really touching on the topic of extending into lower value-added chain links and investing into processing and so on. Gilles mentioned it a little bit, right? But we all do realize that today Ukrainian agriculture is, strictly speaking, mostly a commodity business, right? Advanced in certain respects, still having its problems, some of which you described, but it's mostly commodity business. Do you see this changing, and do you think this is part of the potential impact story, or this is, something which will happen purely for economic motives?
I think there are two issues which should mention here. The one is, if we're going to process something, then we need to understand, I do not speak about the regulatory corruption, etc., so I don't need to talk about that. But I think the two things which are very important to understand, do we plan to go into the processing or not? The first one is the market where we are going to sell our products. So imagine I will start right now to produce chicken eggs because it's right now the huge discussion about the eggs. I would do that. It's actually on my wish list after the war. But I need a guarantee that the European market will be open for that, not for half a year or for 1 year, but for 7 or 10 years. So the market is the key issue. And the second issue is the project financing, because we have right now a lack of working capital or lack of liquidity in a sector. So we don't have any huge profits we had before the war. So right now, and Gilles told it as well, the private sector, unfortunately, is underfinanced here. We don't have money. There is practically no new credits or no new loans actually for the agriculture companies available. So that means processing is an issue, can be issue if we will hear a clear strategy to movement to European Union. And the second one, if we will receive the project financing, like for long-term project financing, like 7-10 years. And I can assure you, if we will actually get two issues solved, then we can increase our production of the so-called value-added products massively during few years. That will be not the big problem, actually.
Just to close this part of the discussion, shortly before the full-scale invasion started, I had a discussion actually with the top executive from another agricultural company, and I was asking this question: that guys, you actually have excess money right now, right? Capital is of course always a problem, but it doesn't seem to be a problem for you at the moment, right? And still you do not invest into processing, right? And the way he described it was approximately like this, right? So we analyzed it, several projects, which are relevant for us. What de facto is most likely to happen is that we exchange the current situation when we have a huge but quite volatile margin into a much smaller but more stable margin. And we actually looked at it, tried to play with different scenarios, and it was not really attractive to us. And then we talked with him later when the invasion already started several months later, and he said probably now looking back that was not such a bad idea, because not even so much about marginality, but this is first of course a diversification. Second, a very banal consideration is that the tonnage to be exported out would have been much smaller, right? And in this sense it would have been a great diversification move for the portfolio. Do you see many agricultural companies looking at decisions they took before the beginning of the full-scale invasion and finding this broader perspective, that we have not really been taking into account, all the possible scenarios and analyzing risks? We have been focused too much only on profits, and we have not been taking the risk dimension into account. Do you see this change of attitude, or this is something which maybe only I saw in this specific conversation?
I mean, we have had discussions also in a club. We have had last year discussions about different topics, service processing. And then, as I said before, of course, probably would be not bad to have last year in the beginning of the war, some kind of value-added products like, I don't know, even to export to European Union. What we like dried eggs, for example, or something like that would be not bad. But at the same time, the issue is that the investments which should be done in Ukraine, the money is very expensive. That was very expensive before the war. Right now is even more expensive. So practically not available, but very expensive as well. So, and the another one issue is, right now we talk about risk. So I would do, for example, I would start a kind of business, a new business in Chernihiv and Sumy region, starting, for example, this production of biofuel. But who is gonna to start right now in the Sumy region a biofuel production where the Russians shoot every day like 200 times? So that means okay, probably we need to start a new business in the western part of the country. Quite risky, yes, risky. What kind of business? Focused on the European market or focused on the domestic market? Do we know actually how big is the domestic market right now? And what's going to happen with the population over the next 2-3 years? Nobody knows exactly. So do you know how long will be the war? No. So how long will be the European market open for us? Right now we have the market for European Union open only till middle of 2023. If it will be prolonged, how long that will be, nobody knows exactly. Nobody can answer you. Right now, we do see actually the big protest even in Poland about the export of the Ukrainian products. So that means there is a long way. And the only one chance to start really projects in a processing here in a country when we do see where is our market, domestic market or a foreign market. Foreign market, which one exactly? European, okay, then we need actually kind of access immediately with a perspective of next 10 years, I don't know what.
Mm-hmm. Okay. If we may move back to Alexander, and I want to ask something related to what Alex just was describing, right? So we understand there is, a huge deficit of capital, despite the extra funding approved by some of the international financial organizations. There is a huge deficit of capital for agriculture. But even more importantly, if I hear him correctly, even more importantly, there is a huge degree of uncertainty. There are simply risks which cannot be properly analyzed and insured at the moment, right? And some of them are, traditional but increased risks. Some of them are actually quite non-traditional, right? This whole topic of military insurance in relation to transportation, right, which has been discussed over the last several months. It is still de facto not really solved because no one wants to reinsure those risks. So my question to you: do you think there are ways to improve the situation before the end of hostilities, before the active phase of the war is over? And what would be the role of various parties? What could the international financial organizations do in this respect? What should be done by the government of Ukraine? What should be and can be done by the private investors? And if it is likely. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. The situation is terrible for all markets, and to assess risks, it is a hard task to do, let's say. So in our strategy, currently we are concentrating on resilient support of the existing businesses and our existing clients. But at the same time, we provide finance, for example, to improve supply chain. Establishing of transshipment facilities in the border of Ukraine and other tasks related to improvements operation of the companies. What we could do right now? We understand that we have a lot of uncertainties with the new investments, new capex investments, but at least we could be prepared for new investments in future periods, which also took some time. I already could mention that we, as a part of European Bioenergy Association, see that there is opportunities for Bioenergy, which will have some additional premium till 2030 in European Union. If you are able to produce right now the Bioenergy, it is relatively valuable product from agricultural waste and residues. Indeed, processing, we currently in Ukraine, there is nearly 15% of grain is processed, even less. Therefore, company, of course, could develop and look for opportunities for new investments, at least starting to prepare feasibility studies, market studies, etc., which usually takes more than 1 year period of time. Yes, we need to improve policy activities. We could start to invest, for example, in irrigation activities, which improves yields and help us to mitigate impact of climate change to agricultural sector. Therefore, it's still opportunities at the market, which should be explored by the company?
Well, actually, the irrigation is probably a great example, right? There have been some sort of smaller scale projects initiated by private investors, private agricultural companies in Ukraine over the last couple of years. But actually, to solve the problem, this was just scratching the surface, right? Because the root of the problem is actually in a different segment of this whole irrigation system. This is at the level even of main water routes, how they are managed, and why there are completely no incentives for local communities and no resources for the central government to invest into those assets, right? And this kind of reform, whatever it is, right? I know it has been discussed by the Ministry of Agriculture and there is a working draft for that, but this kind of reform can simply not be implemented, I guess, by the private players. This is something which has to come from the top, I guess. This has to be enacted by the government. So my question to you is, do you have, not an exhaustive, but a list of top items you would expect from the Ukrainian government to happen in the next, 12, 24 months, so that it unlocks a significant potential investment into Ukrainian agriculture?
Actually, it is a very good initiative, which is hardly supported by civil society, which actually has the name National Recovery Plan for Ukraine, which was presented in Lugano some times ago. It includes both policy dialogue activities and a list of measures which should be implemented with the support of donors, without support of the donors, as different investments. It's not finalized in Ukraine at all, and it could be improved and include some additional measures which will be interesting for different parties. I believe that two key topics right now to have this plan, National Recovery Plan in place, which is actually summarized everything which we need also to implement to be in line with European legislation. I believe that it is our strategic plan which should be finalized, should be adopted in Ukraine, and we need to start implement it.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Dear all, I actually looked into the chat and there was one comment which drew my attention, pointing me towards a specific question I want to pose to Alex now. But before I do that, I want to remind everyone, please provide your questions to the chat. I'm almost out of my questions and we still have a bit of time. So if we see any interesting questions coming from you, we are happy to address them to our guests, to Alex and Alexander. But meanwhile, Alex, there was actually a question which I will rephrase as follows. You have been the president of this Ukrainian Agribusiness Club for ages, right? You have been basically there from the start. Honestly, is ESG a part of regular conversations there? And if so, how do you do it, right? Do you involve, expertise from other countries? Do you invite guests, from other geographies who have relevant experience? Do you share, plans and targets? How is it actually been worked out by the Ukrainian agribusiness community, or everyone is playing on his own at the moment?
No, we have a very good communication. Practically all the largest Ukrainian companies, but not only Ukrainian companies, also international companies which do work in the Ukrainian agriculture, they do communicate with each other. So we are not competitors actually on the market. So we are more friends, partners, etc., etc. So that means we do have different types of projects here together, like Agri Benchmark project, like Ukrainian Agribusiness Club, but also different types of projects. If we do talk exactly about the ESG, the majority of the companies they were invited also to different events organized by IFC or EBRD, and I think there were a lot of discussions internally also. So that means, unfortunately, the number of such companies, I've read also the comment about the creating a kind of club here in Ukraine, ESG club. The number of such companies is very limited. I would say in Ukraine, we have probably 10, 12 companies, which are very on the top of the international standards, up to 15, I would say. The rest, unfortunately, far away from that. And then the war will also impact that situation, because right now everybody's facing completely different types of problems, and not ESG, or ESG is not directly the priority, I would say. So that means yeah, the creation of special platform probably would be interesting, but not right now, because right now they are on the priority list. Can you hear me?
Yes, now again. Yes.
Okay. Sorry. There's something with electricity, I think I have here.
Never mind, but can you repeat the last sentence, because I don't think everyone heard it.
I think the creation of kind of ESG club or ESG platform for the agriculture companies currently is probably not really needed, because all the companies I mentioned, they do talk to each other, they do meet with each other, they do discuss. For many other companies, it's not that topic on a priority list. I think it's like the topic probably somewhere below on the list, not on the top.
Okay, clear, thank you. So basically there are 10, 12 companies, as you said, which are conscious and active in this area and are working with each other, but the other ones probably are not having that minimum level of consciousness required. But then, let's imagine that I am a CEO of a mid-cap company who wants to join this elite club of 12, 12 advanced Ukrainian agricultural companies who are actually thinking about those matters. Practically, what would I start with? In terms of E, in terms of S, in terms of G, and overall, in terms of just thinking about it. What would be my steps? Apart from knocking on your door.
I did not hear the last sentence, I'm sorry.
What would I start practically with if I would want to join the club of advanced companies who could attract investment from abroad, right? If I want to become a better compliant ESG conscious company, what would I start with as a CEO of a mid-cap Ukrainian company?
I think as I said before, the most easy way is to start with G. So just to start to be a student of the Ukrainian Academy of Corporate Governance. They do provide top level education, and I think that's really internationally recognized. So that would be the first step to start to study there. The second step is, of course, probably, I don't know, environment and social. And I think we need also to start with kind of education, because, as I said before, in agriculture, especially with social, the people don't understand what it means social in terms of ESG, because the majority of the people under social and understands improvement of social infrastructure in rural areas, or social payments or something like that, but not they do not talk about the labor, the diversity, I don't know, tolerancy, etc., etc. So that you will understand only if you start to work with IFIs. And with environment, it's completely different area. That's, I think, the most undiscovered probably for many companies, because if we will start to talk with companies about ESG in terms of E, then they will understand you like organic, or not environmentally sustainable. So and there are a lot of issues which are completely unclear for many companies. So I think that should be a kind of education focused on their top management with clear messages, with clear targets. But as I said before, with also implementation of the targets. Because to set targets is a very simple thing. I can declare that I will reduce my CO emission up to 2050, about 30%. How do I achieve that? Nobody knows. So and that probably clear to say where are the benefits. What can I have actually from that point? Not only to have an access to the money of IFI, but probably to sell better my products with carbon certificates, or to get some specific market. I don't know. So that should be clarified, I think.
Okay, thank you. So my last question to both of you, Alex and Alexander, actually, but then we will have some room for additional questions from the audience if they arrive. The question is very simple, right? So let's not talk even about 2030 because it's kind of too close, probably in some way. Let's talk about 2040. How do you see the Ukrainian agricultural sector in 2040 in terms of global prominence and relevance for the global food security, in terms of economic sustainability, and in terms of ESG? What do you think we will face in 2040? And let's start with Alex.
It's a very difficult question. So I think there are two scenarios. The first scenario is the full European integration, and Ukraine became the member of the European Union, so agriculture fully integrated into the European rules. So highly productive, highly competitive, with very high rate of value-added products delivered not only to the European market but also to different countries of the world. So that's a very nice scenario. I like it very much. And in terms of ESG, we don't need to talk about that because as a member of the European Union in 2040, we will be on the top level of that. So everything would be fine. The another one scenario would be Ukraine will not manage to become the member of the European Union because we will not pass the legislation, we will not pass their reforms, I don't know. So we will, actually we will do the same like we've done over the last 30 years. We do declare something, but do not implement it or even not pass. So that would be then different types of development. And I think that will be kind of by model farm structure assessed right now. So we will have a huge number of the small landowners again, which will be not able to live in a rural area to do a production. So they will outsource that. So we will get a kind of service companies which will provide the necessarily production services, including technical equipment, inputs, etc., and also sell the products, like we have sometimes also in Argentina, for example, or Paraguay. And then we will have also large companies which will probably move into the direction kind of service companies or more kind of bioenergy companies or something like that. So I think we will have a completely different story of agriculture in Ukraine. We will have with labor in agriculture. The culture will be more or less competitive due to the logistic, due to the land quality, due to the labor quality. So I think that will work, but not only. I mean, not necessarily as we would wish ESG criteria fully with ESG criteria.
Okay, thank you very much for this very comprehensive answer. Alexander, what's your perspective? How much is it similar to Alex's?
Absolutely, I do not have nothing to add, but I more believe in European future of Ukraine. Therefore, I believe that Ukraine should implement in any case European legislation and which also include non-financial disclosure and other topics related to ESG compliance. A lot of companies, Ukrainian companies, will need to follow also rules, for example, stock exchanges. London Stock Exchange introduced some rules for climate disclosure. With our help, Bucharest Stock Exchange, Warsaw Stock Exchange implement rules of reporting of compliance with best available practice of ESG. And even in a case if Ukraine will not be part of European Union, I believe a lot of companies will follow best available practices of EU in terms of ESG.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are ready to conclude our session. I don't see any additional questions from the audience. I think you still have a couple of minutes to address them if you have them. But otherwise, first of all, I would like to thank very much Alex and Alexander and Gilles, who has left a little bit earlier. It was a very interesting discussion to me, and despite the fact that we discussed probably things which have been touched upon here and there in other events or in publications, I take away several things. The first one, for myself, for example, the first one is even increased importance of European integration for agricultural sector. I think, despite all the stress laid upon it in conversations over the last several months, it is even more important than I imagined before today's event. And this is number one. Number two, my thesis in the beginning of this webinar that this whole ESG pressure is both a threat and an opportunity, I think it is confirmed, right? Because we have actually discussed quite a bit of opportunities, which might lead to additional, investment potential for agricultural sector, to additional profits, and overall, most importantly, actually, to additional benefits for the society at large, for Ukrainian economy overall. And I think this opportunity angle, this is something which, for understandable reasons, we are sometimes, tending to ignore, but we should not underplay it. This is very important. And I think the third thing, which is always very important to me, is quite a bit of optimism. Despite some very sobering, down-to-earth comments which have been provided by all the panelists, I think what especially guests from Ukraine shared today was that they want to believe, and not only believe, but also do practical things to make this belief happen into a better future for our agriculture and for our country in general. Let's face it, we are all here united by the belief in our victory in the broadest possible sense. And, this is great. With this, I will probably conclude and my concluding remarks, and will ask Alex and Alexander, do you want to add anything? Maybe there is something you wanted to say to our audiences before we finish. Alex.
No, I just wanted to say thank you very much, Igor, for a very nice moderation of the event. And I think we have had a really good time today to discuss such important issues. And I hope that that initiative you represent will also occupy in the future with education or teaching, actually, of the agricultural decision makers, which linked to the ESG, that would be probably not bad. So that's the only one wishes. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Alexander?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Igor, for organizing the event. I was happy to contribute to the discussion, and I would like to ensure you and today's participants that European Bank for Reconstruction and Development will continue support of Ukraine, and especially in green topic, in social topic, and in topic of well governance of our companies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Some last words from me. Dear guests and dear audience, the recording of this meeting will be available to you. It will be published shortly, right? So you can share with your colleagues who wanted to join us and were not able. They will have an opportunity to look, to view the discussion later. I want to thank everyone who was able to stay with us until the end. Not only our guests, from Ukraine, but also our guests from other countries, from Caucasus and elsewhere, but especially those from Ukraine, because again, there was an error rate even during this meeting, and some people could not stay until the very end. So that's what we have to face on a daily basis. And lastly, this was event number 3 in a series of Chapter 0 webinars, but this is certainly the last one. We are already planning for the next one. Please follow us. Please follow the messages on the webpage of Chapter 0 Ukraine and Caucasus, and stay tuned. Thank you very much. Stay safe. Goodbye.